So when most people hear death penalty, they're probably going to think about something like lethal injection or the electric chair. But if you hear about someone who's received the death penalty, you're probably going to wonder what they did to get it in the first place. Naturally, you would think that the crime they committed would have to be pretty bad. But in reality, we've used execution since the beginning of time for many different reasons. If we look at the US, in 2012, Amnesty International reported that the US ranked 5th in the world for most executions. And that comes from National Geographic. Many people are changing their minds about the way that they feel about the death penalty for different reasons, whether it's right or wrong, but there are still 3 countries that are consistently at the top of the most execution list each year. I'm going to talk to you about Iraq, Iran, and China and the way that they use the death penalty in their countries. First, I'm going to talk to you about the death penalty in Iraq. The earliest occurrence of any kind of death penalty law or code comes from the Code of Hammurabi, which is written in ancient Babylonia, also known as modern-day Iraq. According to deathpenalty.org, at the time, there were 25 crimes that were punishable by death, and none of these included murder. In the Death Penalty Information Center, last year they approximately estimated about 172 people were executed last year in Iraq, and the most common and used forms of execution are hanging and by firing squad. Former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein was hung in 2006 by the people who he had oppressed for many years. He was hung for crimes against humanity, and it's said that when he was hung, there was an audible crack that was heard, which is basically a sign of a successful long drop hanging. So basically, he died very quickly. Now that I've told you about Iraq, I will tell you about their neighbor, Iran, and how they use the death penalty. Iran differs from Iraq in that they have a history of being a little bit more violent than most countries, and they handle their executions differently. The crimes punishable by death widely range from sexual offenses to drinking, theft, murder, and drug trafficking. One thing uncommon of Iran is that they like to do executions in large numbers, and so it wouldn't be uncommon for them to execute as many as 40 people at once in a public place. And according to Death Penalty Worldwide, when talking about methods of execution, hanging, by firing squad, stoning, and beheading have all been used by Iran in the past. The least common method that I've ever heard about in execution is pushing someone from an unknown height, and Iran is actually the only country to have authorized this kind of execution. And that comes from Death Penalty Worldwide. I've told you about Iran's death penalty, and now I'm going to talk to you about the country who exercises their right to the death penalty the most. I don't know that China has always been number 1 in the world for most executions, but we do know that since their existence, they've used execution for many different reasons. The Death Penalty Worldwide tells us that China's execution and sentencing numbers are not known, actually, and it's considered a state secret, but it's estimated that last year around 7,200 people were executed. China is estimated to kill about as many prisoners in 3 days as the US does in 1 year, and statistically, China executes every 1 in every 260,000 people, whereas compared to the US, who executes about 1 in every 6.7 million people. There are a lot of different reasons for execution, as you can imagine, but if you can think about any crime that you could commit where it would result in a person's death, whether it was intentional or not, you could probably be sentenced to death in China. Most executions are carried out by either lethal injection or a single gunshot to the head, but they've decided recently that the only humane way of execution is by lethal injection. In conclusion, the death penalty is a very controversial topic for many different reasons. Despite your feelings on the death penalty, it's been used by a broad range of cultures throughout all of history for many different reasons. The death penalty began back in ancient Babylonia, or modern-day Iraq, when the Code of Hammurabi was written. Then we learned about Iran, where executions became more violent and often happened in large groups of people in public places. And lastly, I told you about the epicenter of death penalty executions, China. Even though we know that they've always used execution as a form of punishment more than the rest of the world, their numbers are still a mystery. And that is the death penalty in Iraq, Iran, and China.